Hello everyone, this is Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. This is from here on going to be a more intimate version of this popular Live Life Well TV series. In the past episodes, you've seen me in the past speaking to groups, audiences that have been gathered together. Many of those episodes, presentations, were filmed years ago. I would like to film more in this series live in front of audiences, but because of the COVID restrictions, I'm going to be doing a number of future episodes like this, one-on-one, which I think is also pretty good because it takes the formality out of these presentations and makes it a little more personal. So today, it is my sincere pleasure to talk to you about two big band greats who were brothers. You all know their names. You probably danced to many of their tunes, and if you didn't dance to them, I'm sure you were very familiar with them. So I'm going to tell you about the amazing life stories of the Dorsey Brothers. So, question for you. When you hear the name the Dorsey Brothers, what kind of things do you think of? What comes to mind? I'm sure music, I'm sure big band. Do you know their first names? I'm sure you do, Jimmy and Tommy. And when it came to the one and only Dorsey Brothers, and if we're talking about big band, certainly if we're talking about swing, and if we add the years of the 1930s and 1940s into the mix, we almost certainly have to be talking about the one and only Dorsey Brothers. I mean, after all, they were single-handedly responsible for some of the most amazing music to have emerged from that specific time and window of time in American musical history. So what's different about the Dorsey Brothers when you compare them to other big band greats? Well, the Dorsey Brothers were particularly known for being studio musicians. Yes, they would play live. Yes, they would tour, but their forte was actually making music in the studio. Some of the names that have appeared with the Dorseys: Bing Crosby, the Boswell sisters, Glenn Miller, Kay Weber, Helen O'Connell, Bob Eberly, Johnny Mercer, Mildred Bailey, Stan King, and the list actually goes on and on. The Dorsey Brothers could attract these top names in the business simply because they too were some top names in the big band era. It's sad to think that all of that wonderful music, the fashions, the dance steps, the radio and TV shows, the recordings, those amazing live concerts, all come from an era that unfortunately has long since passed. But fortunately, in events such as this between you and I, we are able to talk about the wonderful, wonderful era of music, joy, fun that was big band and certainly the Dorsey Brothers. I'm going to talk to you about them individually, and then I'll combine my presentation to talk about them collectively. Let's start with Tommy first. Thomas Francis Dorsey Jr. was born in Shenandoah. Do you know where Shenandoah is? It's a state that begins with a P, Pennsylvania, Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. The date was November 19th, 1905, and at the age of 16, just like most big band stars, Tommy decided his own fate. It's one thing to decide your own fate, but it's another to go out and create your own fate. To that end, Tommy got a gig playing in a big band. This, of course, was after plenty of musical training as far back as grade school for him. The place was Allentown, Pennsylvania. The band was actually very famous that he became a part of, and it was famous in the 1920s. It was called, and I love this name, the Scranton Sirens. The Scranton Sirens sounds more like the name of a firehouse than a big band. But the band was huge in the 1920s, and Tommy with the band would, as you can probably well imagine, create a buzz wherever he played. People took notice of him. What instrument did Tommy Dorsey play? Do you know? He played the trombone, and he played the trombone beautifully. Not content to rest on his laurels, Tommy would play in other big bands as well, with names that you've no doubt heard of, such as Rudy Vallee, Vincent Lopez, and of course the famous Paul Whiteman, just to name a few. But one can only go so far playing in other big bands. Pretty soon you're gonna wanna do something along those lines on your own, particularly if your name happened to have been Tommy Dorsey. What do you think he decided to do at that point in his fledgling career? What would you do? He formed a band of his own. The Dorsey Brothers Orchestra was formed in 1934. A tune called Every Little Moment was the number that really made it big for the Dorsey Brothers Orchestra. In fact, the world was their oyster, and they were poised to move right into first place on the charts and the big band running in the world of swing. One thing and one thing alone would prevent that from happening, and it's not necessarily what you would think. Just when the Dorseys together were ready to take the world by storm, one day Tommy decided to walk away from it all. What would have caused this odd manifestation to occur? I mean, when you're on top of the world in your career, when everything is flowing just the way that it should be, you just up and walk away from it? Here is what happened. There seemed to be a big dispute between the Dorsey brothers as to how their band should be run. All we ever think of when we see footage of a big band live or when you used to go dance to them was what you saw as an audience member. But understand and realize that there was so much more that went into maintaining a big band behind the scenes than in front of the scenes. Think about it. Tour planning, hotel room accommodation, in all of these millions of cities if you were going on tour, which all these big bands did. Big band chart arrangements, the scores, the music, clothing that the musicians would wear. I mean, the list was really endless. All the legal contracts that had to be drawn up every 2 minutes. The operation of the band was really something behind the scenes. The dispute between the Dorseys, a lot of my research says, had to do with something called ongoing acrimony. Ongoing acrimony. Another source labels it as a dispute as to how the band should be run. What we do know is that Tommy's temper would often get the best of him, and it certainly did on that particular night. He literally, in the middle of the performance, stormed off the stage, never to return to that orchestra again. And this, folks, wasn't only a one-time occurrence. Over time, the brothers would go head to head on many things. It always seemed to be Tommy's acid-tinged tongue that was at the seat of most of their intense disagreements. Some called it an antagonistic spirit between the two brothers. Interesting when that happens, particularly when both brothers happens to be in the arts. Talent is really a fascinating thing when you think about it. Talent can also be a strange thing in that you never exactly know what fuels it. And the strangest things can happen seemingly out of the blue. It's actually not too far a stretch to allege that this antagonistic energy between the Dorsey brothers may have also helped them achieve the great things that they ended up achieving. Were the Dorsey brothers known as perfectionists? Oh, you bet they were. Did they want to have the absolute best in terms of who was in their orchestra? Did they absolutely want to be the best in their chosen field? You bet they did. So a heated argument or two or three or even four can sometimes help fuel one's creativity. In other words, this sort of thing can help feed one's creative muse. Not everybody enjoys working that way. It can be very toxic. It can be very intense. It can be very negative, but you'd be surprised how many performing artists actually do work that way. So right now, right here, so early in their career, they could have been up there with the likes of Benny Goodman, up there with the likes of Glenn Miller, and so many more. But because of what happened, Benny Goodman and Glenn Miller were able to move ahead of the Dorseys to the coveted top spot in the world of big band music at the time. Here's a little more of what happened to and between the Dorsey brothers. It was in New Rochelle, New York, in May of 1935. The venue was something called the Glen Island Casino. Tommy had set a tempo way too fast for Jimmy's liking. Tommy was admonished by his brother for doing so and walked off the stage, never to return again. So what would happen? I'm not going to tell you yet. Why? More about that in a minute. Let me first bring you up to speed about the other Dorsey, Jimmy. James Dorsey was born on February 29th, 1904, also, of course, in Shenandoah, Pennsylvania. James was born a year before Tommy, which, of course, makes Jimmy the older brother. Their father was very strict, to say the least. It was largely because of their father that the boys would end up choosing a career path in big band music. Their father just happened to be a music teacher, but a very strict one at that. To be absolutely sure his sons would practice their instruments, their father would literally hide both of his sons' shoes so they couldn't play outside and finish their practicing instead. It's interesting to note that both boys started out playing the cornet, but they would soon switch to the instruments that would eventually make them famous. Tommy played the trombone, as we already established. What did Jimmy play? You remember? Jimmy played the clarinet, but he also played the alto sax. One more thing before I pick up where I left off. once Tommy walked out of the orchestra. If you think Tommy was totally guilty of arguing and stirring up the pot between the two, he was not alone. You know the old saying, it takes two to tango. But suffice it to say that Tommy was the instigator of the brothers' arguments more often than not. Okay, so now, how did these two multi-talented, dynamically volatile brothers get to where Tommy walked off the stage? They both formed orchestras of their own. So we know how they got there because Tommy walked off the stage, right? Never to return again to that orchestra with Jimmy, at least for now. So as I just said, what they would do next would be to form orchestras on their own. The Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra and the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. So let's talk about Jimmy first this time. Up until now, he was more comfortable playing as part of the old Dorsey Orchestra. He would often play in the sax section, even though, as I said, he could also play clarinet. But when Tommy walked out that fateful night in New Rochelle, New York, Jimmy was forced to move from the sax section right up front to center stage on the conductor's podium. Was he happy about this? Probably not. But he knew that he had to move forward and that there was a somewhat gaping hole that was left by his brother that had to be filled. Jimmy was known as an excellent, superb musician. As a band leader, he was also good because of his superior musicianship that would always come to the fore. But he wasn't very good at ruling the roost as a band leader. This could be a problem because now you have your own orchestra and you happen to be its band leader. Everything in front of the house and the back of the house would now have to be about you and only you. That responsibility, that pressure. But Jimmy's players absolutely loved and respected him. He was the easygoing Dorsey, and it could just be that those in Jimmy's band kind of appreciated that, as opposed to what had happened when the two brothers were together. The Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra had a couple of great years at first, where the band would literally find success, would actually be playing film scores and radio broadcasts. When you are the orchestra that plays for the popular Bing Crosby Kraft Music Hall broadcast, you better know that your orchestra is probably going to make a pretty good name for itself, and so the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra did. This is where the singers Bob Eberly and the amazing Helen O'Connell come in, as they would often appear with Jimmy's orchestra. Great hits would come out of that collaboration. Anybody remember one of my favorite tunes from the big band era? Green Eyes, sung by the immortal Helen O'Connell. But there were also other hits during that time, Maria Elena, and how could we possibly forget Tangerine? Great hits from Jimmy. Suffice it to say that Jimmy's orchestra did very well. And it is also interesting to know that the Jimmy Dorsey Orchestra never ever hit the heights that it probably should have. Tommy Dorsey, on the other hand, was much more passionate and driven when it came to spearheading and leading his big band orchestra. The energy here was a whole lot different than Jimmy's energy. Tommy was driven. Tommy had goals. Tommy would stop at nothing. He would let nothing get in his way. And he truly was a perfectionist with a capital P. Tommy also cornered the market concerning the playing of the trombone in those days. He had a definite playing style that could best be described as smooth and very effortless. Not easy when you're playing a trombone. But this was mostly due to his incredible breath control when he would play that musical instruments. Did audiences sit up and take notice? You better believe they did. Well, there was only one problem with all of this, and I'd like to ask you what you think that might have been. What do you think? Anything? I'll give you a hint. It had to do with communication. Specifically, it was the communication between Tommy and those in his fine orchestra. Let's just say that Tommy's relentless pursuit of perfection did not happen to translate well. And here's an example. When one of his hardworking musicians would make a mistake, Tommy did not handle that well. He wasn't tolerant in the least, and he wasn't afraid to let the poor, erring musician know exactly how he felt. Thus, musicians would often be fired during live performances, and that did not bide well for Tommy Dorsey's presentation. Constant toxic turmoil like that does not make for longevity when it comes to the Tommy Dorsey Orchestra. And that's just a bit of what happened. But there were plenty hits along the way. A hit by the name of I'm Getting Sentimental Over You. How about a song by the name of Song of India? And a number by the name of Boogie Woogie. Not only got America dancing, but were also major hits on the charts as well. That was from 1935 on. But once the 40s started happening, something major happened to Tommy's orchestra, and actually to big band music as well. I'll give you a hint. He was a crooner. He made it big time. He would often solo with big band orchestras, but then when he would step out in front of the orchestra, it was more about him than his appearance with the orchestra. Frank Sinatra. In 1940, Tommy Dorsey signed a very young, inexperienced Frank Sinatra to sing with his orchestra. Previously, Sinatra had been singing with Harry James and his orchestra. Sinatra, get this folks, was all of 24 years of age. What an amazing, successful working relationship this was for both Sinatra and Dorsey. There was what many feel a downside about this, though, and I just explained what that was before. People who went to hear Tommy Dorsey and his orchestra, who would hear Frank Sinatra sing with the orchestra, couldn't care less about the orchestra. Frank Sinatra became a teen idol, and that wouldn't be too good for Tommy. Tommy would disband his band in 1946, only to get it back together for a brief period of time in 1948. Jimmy would do much of the same with his orchestra. The two brothers finally would end up working together on a film called The Fabulous Dorseys in 1948. It was an autobiographical telling of their amazing journey. The two would also appear with their band on the Jackie Gleason TV show and be a regular orchestra for that amazing televised program. Many feel that the big band and swing era came to an end when the Dorsey brothers introduced another famous singer on the Jackie Gleason show by the name of Elvis Presley. And we all know what happened to big band music then. Here is some personal information before we close with a clip of the amazing Dorsey brothers in action. Tommy's married life was interesting to say the least, as you can well imagine. He married his first wife when he was 17. She was 16. they eloped. They had 2 children and divorced after being together for 21 years. Then Tommy married movie actress Pat Dane, and they divorced after 4 years. Tommy would marry once again, but this one would stick, and 2 more children would result from this marriage. Jimmy's personal world was much tamer than Tommy's, as you can well imagine, and though there isn't much published about Jimmy's personal life, I can assure you that it was not as turbulent as Tommy's. Tommy Dorsey passed away when he was only 51 years of age. He was living in Greenwich, Connecticut at the time. He actually choked in his sleep after eating a heavy meal. He also had taken sleeping pills that night when he went to bed. Jimmy died of throat cancer only 7 months later. The year was 1957. A reviewer for People magazine once wrote, quote, "When everything blended, when everything meshed, when the talents, egos, and circumstances came together, the Dorsey brothers produced music that was as good as any in its era." And I would add this to that: some of the best music that has ever been produced in any era. The Dorsey legacy shows, folks, that with hard work, perfectionism, a little bit of turmoil, and a passion for being the best in your chosen field of endeavor, well, when you combine all of that together, great things can happen, as they did when it came to the one, the only Dorsey brothers. So, I would like to close this episode of America's Greatest Personalities featuring the Dorsey brothers with a clip, and I think it's a clip you're truly going to enjoy. This is a live black and white clip of a Dorsey Brothers jam session that occurred one amazing night way back in 1947. Enjoy this clip, and I will take my leave of you now. This has been Robert Landau, Live Life Well TV host, with another episode of America's Greatest Personalities. Here are the great Dorsey brothers back in 1947.